Let us pray. Lord God, may only your word be spoken, and may only your word be heard. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here this morning. Many, many thanks to Bill way back there for the warm welcome and for the chance to work together yesterday on a really, really superb conference downtown. It was just great, and I hope that more good things, and I can't see how more good things won't come out of that, and the chance to be here at 8 o'clock this morning in the Rector's Forum, and it's a real pleasure to be here. As Bill said, my name's Fletcher. I run an interfaith environmental organization. We're based in New Jersey, and I've been a number of places where when I've announced that I run an interfaith environmental organization and that I'm from New Jersey, people actually burst out laughing. And so you guys have passed the first test of hospitality today by giving New Jersey a break, which we really appreciate it. What I'd like to do is to share with you a couple of stories to try to help us walk more deeply into understanding why it is that as people of faith, we really have to step up for protecting this earth, our common home. You all are doing good work on that already, which is great. Many, or a growing number of faith communities are. And we need to, as Emerald says, kick it up a notch because of the challenges that face us. The first story I want to tell you, I have a son. He's 21 years old now. He wasn't always that age. Back in the day, I bought him one of those Nintendo Game Boys, one of those little electronic Game Boy things. So immediate surgical attachment. We all know how that goes. And all the time playing this thing, at the dinner table, during conversations, all this stuff. Ground rules got set, ground rules got broken. But as a parent, you pick your battles. All of his friends had one of these things, gave in and lived to regret it. So the same year that I got Max this thing, I got a speaking gig out in Bozeman, Montana. And so I hauled him along so that we could go hiking and camping for a few days. So we were in the car on the way to Newark Airport, and he's playing this thing in the back seat, and we take off in the plane, and the stewardess comes on when you go up over 10,000 feet and says that you can turn your electronics back on, like you can switch your life support system back on. So on comes the Game Boy, and we land in the other end of the flight and going out in the rental car, and this thing's still going on. So we got a couple of hours later to the trailhead where we were going to start our trip. And I watched this little guy who was, 10 years old at the time, something like that, 11 years old. He gets out of the car, and he looks around him at these absolutely massive 10, 12,000 foot tall mountains that were jutting up towards the clouds like these enormous muscles coming up out of the earth. And he looked at these elegant, majestic pine trees, 150 feet straight up towards the sky. And he listened and felt, and you could feel this river that was about 75 yards away crashing through its banks with snowmelt from the mountaintops, and you breathe in the air, and it's clean, and it's very crisp. And for the next week that we were out there, he didn't ask for his Game Boy once. Now, there are lots of good and legitimate jokes that can be made about how all parents would like to have this level of power over their children in relationship to their electronics. But there's more than a joke to this. The natural world has the capacity that is unique to beguile us, to entrance us, to enchant us with a beauty and a majesty and an awe and a wonder that is at the same time remarkably and blessedly childlike, and also extraordinarily sophisticated and emerging and evoking the deepest sense of beauty and of joy from us. It's a remarkable thing. All traditions have this. We've done countless hundreds of interviews with people from all different religious backgrounds and traditions about whether they can recall these kinds of stories. They all can. When you watch people tell these stories, they come alive. I'm a pastor. I know what it's like when God's Spirit enters into human life, and it happens when people recall these stories. I was at a conference once doing a number of interviews. I'd put it out that I wanted to talk with people from different spiritual backgrounds about these experiences for some interviews we were doing. Halfway through the interviews, there was a vigorous knock on the door. A person stood there and said, "I'm an atheist. Why don't you want to talk to me about my spiritual experience outdoors?" Remember the atheist thing. I'll come back to it in a minute. So there is this foundational reality that is out there about this relationship that we have with the earth. A couple of years ago, we did a series of interviews in London because it's a city almost unique on the planet where you get people from an incredible diversity of ethnic and cultural and religious backgrounds, many of whom are recent immigrants, so you get a truly global sample. We wanted to find out, what is the story that people tell when they think deeply about their relationship to the earth from a religious perspective? What emerged through a series of interviews and conversations and focus groups and surveys following up was this remarkably simple narrative, which is that people of different spiritualities and faiths around the world, we believe together that the earth's a gift. We believe it's our responsibility to care for that gift. We recognize that things are badly out of balance, and we feel that it's time to wake up. It's a simple narrative. It's a true narrative. If only the accomplishment of the task was so easy. Second story about a woman, if she is still alive, she would be in her early 40s, named Amina Muse, who lived for many years on a 2-acre farm outside of Mogadishu in a town in Somalia called Kuryurle, small village in southern Somalia. The last 4 years, the rain has not fallen in any meaningful way in her part of Somalia. It's a pattern of drought that we're seeing more and more and more around different parts of the world, which scientists know is attributable to our changing climate. And what no rain means for people in that circumstance is no rain means no food. No rain means that if you're fortunate enough to own animals as your perhaps almost only possession apart from your clothing and your cooking utensils and the materials with which you furnish your home, no rain means eventually that your animals die. And eventually, if it gets bad enough, which it did for Amina, it means that you have to up and move. Amina had nothing left to eat, and so she gathered her family and left the land, which was her family's sole possession, moved into a refugee camp in Mogadishu where thousands and thousands of people from around the countryside were arriving because she was far from alone in facing the predicament that she faced. Faced with this influx of people, all of a sudden land in Mogadishu started getting much more valuable. And speculators wanted a piece of the action. And last December, on the morning of December 29th, there were 21 different refugee settlements inside of Mogadishu who woke up to bulldozers and heavy-duty trucks plowing through the refugee settlements and literally flattening them. Thousands and thousands of people were dislocated once again, because again, these were refugee camps, not permanent settlements. Homes, schools demolished. Local NGOs reported that these evictions, which is a nice word for what happened, were done with no prior consultation whatsoever. And despite or in the face of numerous requests by the community for time to collect their belongings and safely vacate the premises. Journalists have lost touch with Amina. They don't know where she is, if she is still alive. This is a global pattern that is playing out in Bangladesh. 70% of the thousands of refugees that come into Bangladesh to resettle are being forced to relocate because of rising sea levels. The sea levels rise, their very low elevation ground becomes infiltrated with salty water. Water supplies become undrinkable, the farmland becomes unfarmable, and the pattern of dislocation and of impoverishment gains momentum. Climate change, what it does is it accelerates, it puts on steroids every single problem that faith communities for centuries have been working to address. It accelerates poverty, income inequality, ill health, the loss of productive enterprise. It heightens tensions because we've seen over the last couple of years, haven't we, on a global level, what happens to the fabric of our global culture when large numbers of people who are desperately poor need to move from one region to another. A few countries and many good people acquit themselves well, but there have been lots of disappointments, and that's an understatement. This is a problem that we face, and what is so frustrating about this for those of us in the business, so to speak, is that there has been ample warning about these problems for many, many years. I'm going to read you excerpts from a couple of different memos that were written to give you a sense of this. The first memo starts off, there's general agreement that the most likely manner in which humankind is influencing the climate is through carbon dioxide release from the burning of fossil fuels. The risk of climate change is real and warrants action. Climate change could have major social, economic, and political consequences, a powerful enough upheaval to be the greatest in human history. The changes in climate being considered are at an unaccustomed distance in time for future planning, even beyond the lifetime of many present decision makers, but not beyond intimate family association. In other words, we may not see the results of current decisions, but our children and grandchildren will. With the very long time scales involved, it would be tempting for society to wait before doing anything. The potential implications for the world are, however, so large that policy options need to be considered much earlier. Otherwise, it could be too late to take effective countermeasures to reduce the effects or even to stabilize the situation. That language, almost verbatim, was written in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and it was taken, we know, thanks to good investigative journalism and Freedom of Information Act requests, it was taken from internal memos of ExxonMobil and Shell. Jesus talks in the gospel this morning about watching out for the hired hand who does not have the well-being of the people at heart. I'm here to tell you something that you already know, which is that we live in the midst of a system in which the hired hands, which control much of the world's economy and its energy systems, are compromised. It's not an easy thing. So, having taken you down, I'm here to tell you and to invite you to join a most blessed and enjoyable and feisty and fun resistance that is springing up around the world in labor unions, in community groups, in schools, in universities, in faith communities inside of government departments, in certain green businesses. The resistance to this trend, and a group of people determined to make things right. One of the lowest points for this resistance was in 2010, after the Copenhagen Climate Change Summit had cratered horribly, and the world's hopes had been pinned on that, and that was going to be the time when there was going to be a global treaty that was going to solve the problem, and sort of grassroots activism was going to have educated people. People were going to put pressure on their elected officials. Elected officials were going to change. It was this nice, rational theory of change. It sounded so good, and it just totally flopped. And in the aftermath of that summit, there was this audible silence from within this community of activists, because there was no means of finding hope. Right in that period of time, a couple of students, it always starts with the students. A couple of students at Swarthmore, they got together and they thought, it is ridiculous that this university, which is preparing us for a future to be leaders, is at the same time chucking money into the fossil fuel industry, which is patently undermining that future. And so they had the temerity to go to their president of the university and to say, you got to get the university out of the fossil fuel investments from the endowment. The university professor, the university president, with an almost endearing level of condescension, said to the students, it's nice, go do your homework, guys, let the adults run the ship here. 6 months later, Bill McKibben wrote an article in Rolling Stone magazine that highlighted the importance of the fossil fuel divestment, drew parallels to the South African divestment movement that I'd been involved in when I was in college. Within 3 months after the publication of the article, which went viral, there were fossil fuel divestment chapters on 400 colleges and universities around the country. It's a great line in a Leonard Cohen song, there's a crack in everything, it's where the light comes in. A crack had opened up. Faith communities around the world played a massive role and continue to do so in the divestment movement. $5 trillion in assets under management pledged to various forms of divestment after 6 years of that movement, the fastest growing divestment campaign in human history. Just last week, Caritas Internationalis, the enormous international Catholic relief and development agency network, announced its divestment commitment. And they're not just divesting. Faith groups more and more are finding ways to invest resources into creating clean energy systems that bring power and life to communities, to the 1 billion people around the planet who lack access to modern forms of energy. The Episcopal Church Pension Fund partnered recently with the United Methodist Pension Fund for a $150 million investment in such a deal. Things are on the move. Another way in which this resistance has manifested itself and this blessed unrest is through mobilizing. We were deeply involved in the People's Climate March in New York in 2014. Ban Ki-moon, back at the time the UN Secretary General, was doing everything he could, God bless him, to push governments to try to get with the program and to address climate change. So he did a very strategic thing. He put all of his sort of political capital on the table, and he called for a global climate change summit in New York. Right after he called it, he got on the phone to a bunch of NGOs and begged us to turn thousands of people out into the streets so that government leaders would show that they needed to take action. So we were involved in that. We worked with about 30 different faith groups: Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, Baha'is, Jains, every flavor of Christianity imaginable. 2 weeks before the march, here's where the atheists come in again. I got an angry phone call from the leader of the largest atheist organization in the country. They said, "Why isn't there an atheist group organizing as part of your faith contingent?" Who'd have known? So we brought the atheists in. Atheist begins with A. Guess what everybody saw when they went to the drop-down menu on the website to sort of choose? We hoped like crazy the night before the march that we'd have 100,000 people in the streets. And so when 400,000 people showed up and marched peacefully through the streets of New York with hundreds of thousands of others around the world, world leaders sat up and took notice. And the momentum that mobilization created helped lead towards the Paris Climate Agreement, an incredible accomplishment. One of my favorite signs, the day of the march, was a sign that some labor unions had put together. It was actually a diorama that was the size of almost a small school bus. Had laborers installing solar panels and building wind turbines, and the language underneath said, "Labor is ready and able." We created a small replica of Noah's Ark about the size of a camper and pulled it along the 4 miles of the march with a biodiesel-powered pickup truck. On the sign we had outside of the ark, we had a sign that said, "We are all Noah now." If you haven't been to one of these mobilizations, it's perfect for Episcopalians. It's like a 4-mile procession into church. It's just great. Your soul gets woken up in a way that you will remember for the rest of your life. The first lesson that we had today, God puts us in the garden to till it and to keep it. The words in Hebrew, till and keep, that word till, when it's used elsewhere in the Hebrew scriptures, it is translated serve. Joshua says, "As for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord." It's the same word. The other word, keep, it shows up elsewhere as protect, guard. Guardians of the galaxy, right? It's a muscular word. It's a good word. And we need, in order to do this, to be mobilizing on frankly, every level imaginable, on the political level, on the economic level. Our own lifestyles are part of the mix. We've got an international multi-faith campaign going to try to get religious leaders to make commitments to reduce their meat consumption, to use much more efficient forms of travel, which means less car travel, less airline travel, more public transit, more bicycling. There was a great campaign about 10 years ago that was at the time that hybrid cars were first coming out, called "What Would Jesus Drive?" Jesus would have taken mass transit, I think. Try also home energy use as a piece of the picture. This is not easy stuff, right? You're not supposed to talk about religion. You're not supposed to talk about politics. You're definitely not supposed to talk about lifestyles if you want to have a friendly conversation. But I'm here to tell you, we have no choice. We have no choice. This earth is an incredible gift. Not one of us did anything to earn it. It's just like God's grace. It is a gift freely given. And future generations and those who are on the front lines today they have a lot at stake, as we all do. This church has done good work in relationship to this, and we need you, and I'm here to urge and to implore you to be ready to step up even more. I would love it if Christ Church Cranbrook went public and said that within 4 or 5 years, you're going to have a zero carbon footprint. And I'd love to see Bill go to the Consortium of Endowed Parishes and throw down and say, "Christ Church did this, folks. How about everybody else jump on board?" That's the kind of leadership that we're seeing in more and more places. And you know what? It's hard at first, but it's fun. It really is fun, and it gives meaning to our faith. If you look at the words that we sang in the hymns this morning, those are either a nice saying on the front of a Hallmark card, or they represent a call to action. The earth is a gift. It is our responsibility to take care of that gift. Things are badly out of balance. It is time, and it is fun to wake up. May we all be blessed to wake up. Amen.